The morning I stepped on the scale and saw those three numbers staring back at me was the morning everything changed between my mother and me forever. 105 pounds, I whispered the numbers to myself like they were some kind of sacred prayer, because after years of struggling with my weight and my self-image, they finally represented the victory I had been working so hard to achieve. I remember standing there in our little upstairs bathroom with the cracked tile by the sink and the window that never quite closed all the way, letting in the sounds of our suburban neighborhood waking up. Birds chirping, the distant hum of a lawnmower starting up somewhere down the street, the normalcy of it all contrasting so sharply with the earthquake that was about to hit our household. My name is Emily, and I had just turned 17 3 months earlier, though looking back now from where I sit today, I realize how much older I felt in that moment. Growing up as an only child with a single mother in the suburbs of Columbus, Ohio, had shaped me in ways I was only beginning to understand. My mother Patricia had raised me entirely on her own since before I could even form memories, and while I knew there had been a father somewhere in the picture, once upon a time, his absence was such a complete and total thing that I had long ago stopped wondering about the empty space he left behind. For as long as I could remember, my mother had been two different people. To the outside world, she was Patricia Chen, successful real estate agent with the perfectly styled black hair and the designer suits that hung on her tiny frame like they were made for her, which they probably were given how much she spent on them. She was the woman who showed up to every parent-teacher conference with a leather planner and a fountain pen taking notes about my progress like she was preparing for a board meeting. She was the mum who drove an hour and a half each way to find the specific brand of art supplies I needed for a school project, and who spent entire weekends hand-sewing an elaborate Victorian dress for me to wear to the 7th grade historical reenactment day. But at home, especially when it came to food, she transformed into someone I struggled to recognize. While she subsisted on carefully portioned salads and grilled chicken breasts and those expensive green smoothies she was always blending up in her Vitamix, she fed me a completely different diet. From the time I was old enough to eat solid food, she had been pushing the highest calorie foods imaginable onto my plate. Frozen chicken nuggets swimming in sauce, boxes upon boxes of those toaster pastries with the artificial fruit filling, mac and cheese made with extra butter and whole milk, pizza rolls for breakfast, because she said protein was important to start the day, even if that protein came wrapped in processed dough and smothered in cheese. I spent my 14th birthday as a 160-pound girl, standing 5'2" tall and trying desperately to disappear inside the baggiest clothes I could find. I remember that birthday clearly because it was the day something finally clicked inside my head. My mother had made this elaborate cake covered in buttercream roses, and when she brought it out, singing happy birthday with this bright smile on her face, all I could think about was how none of the other girls at school looked like me. They wore fitted jeans and cute tops while I hid inside men's hoodies I bought from the clearance rack. They ran around during gym class while I made excuses to sit on the bleachers. They had boyfriends who held their hands in the hallway while I walked alone, pretending I preferred it that way. The diet my mother maintained for herself was like something out of a wellness Instagram account, all quinoa bowls and fresh vegetables and lean proteins carefully weighed on her kitchen scale. She would spend Sunday afternoons meal prepping her food for the week, organizing everything into glass containers labeled with days and calorie counts. Meanwhile, she would prepare entirely separate meals for me. Lasagna loaded with 3 types of cheese, fried chicken with mashed potatoes drowning in gravy, Chinese takeout where she would order me the largest portions of the greasiest items on the menu while she nibbled on steamed vegetables with sauce on the side. Looking back now, I can see how calculated it all was, but at the time, I just thought my mother had different tastes than me. I thought maybe she was one of those people who genuinely preferred healthy food while I had somehow inherited taste buds that craved everything bad for me. It never occurred to me to question why she never offered to share her meals with me or why she got upset when I showed interest in what she was eating. I remember once when I was about 12 asking if I could try some of her Greek yogurt parfait and the way her face closed off completely. "That has tree nuts in it," she said, quickly snatching the bowl away. "You might be allergic." I had never shown any signs of food allergies in my life. The summer between 8th grade and freshman year was when I finally decided enough was enough. I was tired of shopping in the women's section for clothes that still didn't fit right. I was tired of feeling winded walking up the stairs to my bedroom. Most of all, I was tired of feeling like I was watching my life from the outside while everyone else was actually living theirs. So I started making changes in secret. When my mother wasn't home, I would look up healthy recipes online, clearing my browser history afterward, like I was doing something shameful. I began walking in the early mornings before she woke up, telling her I had joined a before-school study group that met at the library. The weight came off slowly at first, those initial pounds fighting me every step of the way, but I was determined in a way I had never been about anything before. I started packing my own lunches, claiming I wanted to be more independent. I would make sandwiches with turkey and vegetables while my mother watched from the kitchen doorway with this strange expression on her face, like she was trying to solve a puzzle she didn't quite understand. At dinner, I began serving myself instead of letting her pile my plate high the way she always had. "I'm not that hungry," I would say, pushing food around to make it look like I had eaten more than I had. She would frown but couldn't force me to clean my plate without seeming unreasonable. By the time my 17th birthday rolled around 3 months ago, I had lost 45 pounds through nothing but determination and careful planning. I had discovered workout videos online that I could do silently in my room with the door locked. I had learned which foods would keep me full without weighing me down. Most importantly, I had learned that I was capable of far more than I had ever given myself credit for. The girl who looked back at me from the mirror now was someone I recognized as myself for the first time in years. Which brings me back to that morning in the bathroom, standing on the scale in my pajamas with my hair still messy from sleep. 105 pounds represented so much more than just a number. It represented every early morning walk, every skipped dessert, every time I had chosen water over soda, despite my mother's insistence that I needed the calories for energy. It represented the fitted jeans hanging in my closet that I had bought as motivation months ago and could finally wear. It represented possibility and hope and a future where I felt comfortable in my own skin. I practically flew down the stairs that morning, my feet barely touching the steps in my excitement to share the news with my mother. I had built up this moment in my head for months, imagining how proud she would be, how we would celebrate together, maybe even go shopping for new clothes to mark the occasion. I could picture her face lighting up the way it did when I brought home a good report card or won an award at school. I imagined her pulling me into one of those fierce hugs she gave when she was really, truly happy about something. The kitchen smelled like coffee and bacon when I burst through the doorway. My mother was standing at the stove wearing her Saturday morning silk robe, her hair already perfectly styled, even though it was barely 7:30 in the morning. She turned when she heard me, her spatula still in hand, and I watched her expression change as she took in my appearance. I was wearing pajama shorts and a fitted tank top instead of my usual baggy sleepwear, and I could see her eyes tracking over my body, registering the changes that were impossible to hide anymore. The smile I had plastered on my face faltered as I watched something flash across her features. It was there and gone in an instant, but I saw it clearly. Disgust mixed with something else, something that looked almost like fear. The spatula in her hand trembled slightly before she turned back to the stove. I stood there in the doorway, feeling suddenly exposed and vulnerable in a way that made me want to run back upstairs and hide under my covers. But I had come too far to back down now, so I took a deep breath and said the words I had been practicing in my head. "Mom, I've lost 45 pounds, I said, trying to inject enthusiasm into my voice despite the cold feeling spreading through my chest. I waited for her response, for any sign of the celebration I had imagined, but she kept her back to me, flipping bacon with mechanical precision. The silence stretched out between us until it became unbearable. Finally, she spoke without turning around, her voice flat and emotionless in a way I had never heard before. "Just don't let it get to your head, Emily." Then she was moving past me, carrying a plate loaded with what looked like half a package of bacon and a stack of waffles drowning in syrup and butter. She set the plate down at my usual spot at the kitchen table, the ceramic hitting the wood with a sharp sound that made me flinch. "Eat your breakfast before it gets cold," she said, and there was something in her tone that brooked no argument. I sank into my chair, staring at the mountain of food in front of me. My stomach turned at the sight of all that grease and sugar first thing in the morning. I picked up my fork and managed a few bites of waffle, the syrup coating my throat in a way that made me want to gag. My mother sat across from me with her own breakfast, a small bowl of steel-cut oatmeal with fresh berries and a sprinkle of chia seeds. She watched me eat with an intensity that made my skin crawl. Every bite I took seemed to relax something in her shoulders, while every moment I paused had her leaning forward slightly, her fingers drumming against the table. "I can't finish all this," I said, finally setting down my fork when I had eaten maybe a quarter of what she had served me. The look she gave me then was unlike anything I had ever seen from her before. It was cold and calculating and completely devoid of the warmth I had always associated with my mother. "You'll eat what I serve you," she said quietly, "or I'll call your school and tell them about how you've been copying homework from Sarah all year." My mouth fell open in shock. I had shared that information with her in confidence weeks ago when I was struggling in calculus, and Sarah had helped me understand the concepts by letting me look at her work. I had never actually copied anything, just used her examples to figure out how to solve the problems myself. But the way my mother said it made it sound like I had been cheating systematically, and we both knew how seriously my school took academic integrity violations. "You wouldn't," I whispered, but even as the words left my mouth, I could see in her eyes that she absolutely would. This wasn't the mother who had driven across town for art supplies or stayed up all night helping me with science fair projects. This was someone else entirely, someone who looked at my weight loss like it was a personal attack against her. I picked up my fork again and forced down a few more bites while she watched. Finally, when I absolutely couldn't eat anymore, I pushed back from the table and fled to my room, my stomach churning from more than just the heavy breakfast. The days that followed fell into a strange new pattern. My mother began serving me portions that were easily double what I had been eating before. She would stand over me while I ate, making sure I finished everything on my plate. When I tried to refuse, she would bring up the homework threat again, or find new forms of manipulation. She started picking me up from school instead of letting me walk home, claiming she was worried about my safety, even though I had been walking that same route for years. The real reason became clear when she began stopping at fast food restaurants on the way home, ordering large meals that she insisted I eat in the car while she watched. I tried everything I could think of to avoid the constant force feeding. I would claim I wasn't feeling well only to have her threaten to take me to the doctor for unnecessary tests. I would say I had eaten large lunches at school, but she started calling the cafeteria to verify what I had purchased. I even tried hiding food in my napkin to throw away later, but she began checking the trash can after meals. It was like living with a prison warden who was obsessed with making me gain back every pound I had lost. The stress of it all was wearing me down. I found myself crying in my room at night, feeling more alone than I ever had in my life. The mother I had grown up with, the one who had been my best friend and biggest supporter, had been replaced by this controlling stranger who seemed to view my body as her personal property. I couldn't understand what had changed or why my weight loss had triggered this extreme reaction. All I knew was that I was trapped in a situation that was becoming increasingly unbearable. 3 weeks into this new reality came my 17th birthday. Despite everything that had been happening, I still held out hope that the day might mark a return to normalcy. When I had asked my mother a week earlier if I could have a Halloween-themed birthday party since my birthday fell in October, and I had always loved the holiday, she had actually smiled. It was the first genuine smile I had seen from her since that morning on the scale. "Yes, honey," she had said, reaching out to touch my cheek in a gesture so familiar and motherly that it made my chest ache. "Let me make the birthday cake, I insist." I threw myself into party planning with an enthusiasm born partly from excitement and partly from desperate hope. I invited a small group of friends from school people who had become closer to me as I had gained confidence along with losing weight. I decorated the house with fake cobwebs and paper bats, and those little plastic pumpkins filled with candy. I even found the perfect costume, a snow-white dress complete with a blue corset top and flowing yellow skirt. It was the kind of outfit I never would have had the confidence to wear before, and putting it on made me feel like I was stepping into a new version of myself. The day of the party, I got dressed early, unable to contain my excitement. The costume fit perfectly, hugging my waist in a way that made me feel beautiful and feminine and proud of how far I had come. I wanted to show my mother, to share this moment with her, and maybe remind her of all the Halloween costumes she had made for me over the years when things between us were simpler and easier. So I crept down the hallway toward the kitchen, where I could hear her moving around, presumably working on my birthday cake. The kitchen door was slightly open and I paused outside, planning to surprise her. Through the gap, I could see her at the counter, her back to me, as she worked on what looked like chocolate cake batter in a large mixing bowl. She was humming under her breath, something she only did when she was in a particularly good mood, and I felt a flutter of hope that maybe we were finally moving past whatever had come between us. Then I saw her reach for something on the counter beside her, and my heart nearly stopped. It was an enormous container of powder, the kind I recognized from the nutrition store at the mall. Mass gainer protein powder designed to help people bulk up quickly, with each scoop containing hundreds of extra calories. As I watched, frozen in horror, she began pouring it directly into the cake batter, not measuring, just dumping what looked like half the container into the bowl. My sharp intake of breath must have been audible because she started to turn, and without thinking, I burst through the door. "What are you doing?" I screamed the words, tearing from my throat without conscious thought. My mother spun around so fast that the container flew from her hands, sending powder everywhere. It coated the counter, the floor, her silk blouse in a fine layer of beige dust. For a moment we just stared at each other, her face cycling through expressions so quickly I could barely track them. Surprise, guilt, anger, and finally settling on something that looked almost like shame. But the shame lasted only a second before her face hardened into defensive lines. "I was just adding protein," she said, lifting her chin to make the cake healthier. "You're always saying you want to eat better, so I thought this would help." The lie was so transparent, so obviously false, that it actually hurt to hear her say it. This woman who had raised me, who had taught me the importance of honesty, who had grounded me for a week when I was 11 for lying about breaking her favorite vase, was standing there covered in evidence of her betrayal and still trying to deceive me. For a moment, I felt rage building in my chest, hot and powerful and threatening to overflow. I wanted to scream at her, to throw the ruined cake batter against the wall, to ask her why she was doing this to me. But then, something else took over, a cold clarity that seemed to come from somewhere outside myself. If she wanted to play games, then I would play too. And I would win. I forced my face into a smile that probably looked as fake as it felt. "Oh, Mom," I said, making my voice light and teasing. "I'm so glad you're trying to help me gain weight. I've been feeling too skinny lately anyway." "Maybe you could add even more next time, really help me bulk up." The confusion that flashed across her face was almost worth the effort it took to say those words. She had expected tears or anger or submission. She hadn't expected me to call her bluff. For the rest of the party preparation, I acted like nothing had happened. I helped her clean up the powder, laughing about what a mess we had made. I watched her quickly throw together a new cake, this time under my watchful eyes, so she couldn't add any surprise ingredients. When my friends arrived, I greeted them with genuine enthusiasm, determined not to let my mother ruin this day for me. We played Halloween-themed games and took dozens of pictures, and I made absolutely sure not to eat a single bite of anything my mother had prepared. My friends seemed to have a great time, and several of them commented on how amazing I looked in my costume. Jessica, who had always been one of the prettier girls in our grade, actually asked where I had bought it because she wanted one for herself. Tyler, from my English class, spent most of the party finding excuses to talk to me, and even asked if I wanted to study together sometime, which we all knew was teenage code for a date. Through it all, I was aware of my mother watching from the edges of the room, her smile never quite reaching her eyes. That night, after everyone had gone home and the decorations had been taken down, I sat in my room with my journal and tried to make sense of what was happening. The image of my mother pouring mass gainer into my birthday cake kept replaying in my mind like some kind of twisted movie scene. This went beyond concern or even control. This was deliberate sabotage. She wasn't trying to protect me or help me. She was actively trying to make me gain weight against my will. The question that tortured me was why. I thought about all the comments she had made over the years that took on new meaning in light of recent events. The way she would say things like, "Boys only want one thing," when I mentioned a crush in middle school. How she constantly warned me about people who would take advantage of you if you're not careful. The way she had seemed almost relieved when I didn't get invited to school dances because of my weight, saying those things are overrated anyway, honey. Had she been keeping me heavy on purpose all along? The next morning I decided to test my theory. I made a big production of weighing myself while my mother was getting ready for work in her bedroom, making sure to leave the bathroom door open so she would hear me. "Oh my God," I gasped loudly as I looked at the scale, even though the number hadn't actually changed. "Mom, come quick, I've gained 5 pounds since yesterday." I heard her footsteps hurrying down the hallway and she appeared in the doorway still holding her curling iron. The expression on her face when she saw me standing on the scale told me everything I needed to know. She looked pleased, not concerned about sudden weight gain that would be physically impossible, not worried about my health, just pleased. Like I had finally done something right. "Oh, honey," she said, and her voice was warmer than it had been in weeks. "It's probably just water weight. Don't worry about it." But she was smiling as she said it, a real smile that reached her eyes for the first time since I had announced my weight loss. That's when I knew for certain. My mother wanted me to be overweight. She had deliberately kept me heavy throughout my childhood, and now that I had taken control of my own body, she was doing everything in her power to undo my progress. The realization hit me like a physical blow, leaving me breathless and dizzy. The woman I trusted most in the world had been sabotaging me my entire life, but I was done being her victim. If she wanted to play manipulation games, I would show her I had learned from the best. I started an elaborate charade of pretending to give in to her control. I would wait until she was watching, then grab handfuls of chips or cookies, exclaiming about how hungry I was all the time now. Then I would take the food to my room or the bathroom and flush it down the toilet or wrap it in tissues and hide it in my backpack to throw away at school. I would come back for seconds and thirds, patting my stomach and talking about how good everything tasted. Meanwhile, I doubled down on my secret efforts to maintain my weight. I told my mother I was joining after-school study groups that met every day when really I was using the school gym. I had made friends with Mr. Davidson, the PE teacher, who was happy to let me work out in the weight room after hours, as long as I helped him put away equipment afterward. I discovered I actually loved lifting weights, loved the way it made me feel strong and capable in ways that went beyond just being thin. I also started keeping a detailed journal documenting everything that was happening. Every threat my mother made every time she tried to force food on me, every comment about my body or eating habits. I took photos of the ridiculous portions she served me compared to her own tiny meals. I recorded conversations on my phone when she wasn't paying attention. I wasn't sure what I would do with all this evidence, but something told me I might need it someday. One afternoon while my mother was showing houses, I decided to do some investigating of my own. I had always been curious about our lack of family photos from before I was born. My mother claimed that most of them had been lost in a move, but I had never quite believed that explanation. So I climbed up to the attic, something I rarely did because of all the spider webs and dust, and started going through the boxes stored up there. It took some digging, but eventually I found what I was looking for. A box labeled Patricia High School was tucked behind some old Christmas decorations. Inside were yearbooks, photo albums, and what looked like diary entries. I sat cross-legged on the dusty floor and began looking through them, feeling like an archaeologist uncovering ancient secrets. What I found changed everything I thought I knew about my mother. In every single high school photo, my mother was heavy. Not just a little overweight, but significantly larger than I had ever been. In her senior portrait, she was almost unrecognizable as the slim woman who had raised me. Her face was rounder, her body hidden under loose clothing in a way that seemed painfully familiar. I found pictures of her at prom in a dress that looked like it was designed to hide rather than flatter. Pictures at graduation where she stood apart from groups of thinner girls. Pictures where even through the camera lens you could see the sadness in her eyes. Then I found another album from a few years later. The first pages showed my mother still heavy but smiling with a man who had to be my father. He was tall and lanky with my same dark eyes and the dimple in his left cheek that I saw every time I smiled at myself in the mirror. In these photos, my mother looked genuinely happy, holding his hand, laughing at something he was saying, her face lit up with joy I had never seen before. But as I flipped through the pages, a pattern emerged. The photos seemed to document their relationship, and as time went on, my mother appeared to be losing weight. By the last photos in the album, she was probably close to the size I remembered from my childhood. But something else had changed too. The joy in her face had been replaced by something harder, more determined. And my father was no longer in any of the pictures. I sat back against a dusty box trying to process what I was seeing. This wasn't just about control or protection or whatever twisted logic my mother had been operating under. This was about her own history, her own pain. Something had happened between her and my father, something connected to weight and appearance that had broken her in ways she had never recovered from. And now she was trying to protect me from the same fate by keeping me heavy enough that no one would ever want me the way someone had wanted and then rejected her. Understanding the why didn't make it okay. If anything, it made me angrier to realize that she had projected her own trauma onto me my entire life. She had stolen my childhood and my confidence and my health because she couldn't face her own demons. But it also made me realize that this problem was bigger than I had thought. My mother wasn't just controlling, she was deeply damaged in ways that required more help than I could provide. The next day I brought up the photos casually while we were having dinner. I had made sure to load my plate with food to keep her happy, even though I had no intention of eating most of it. Mum, I said, between fake bites of the lasagna she had made, I found some old photo albums in the attic today. You looked so happy in those pictures with Dad. The fork stopped halfway to her mouth and she went completely still. It was like watching someone freeze frame in a movie, even her breathing seemed to pause. When she finally moved again, it was to set her fork down very carefully on her plate. The sound it made in the quiet kitchen seemed unnaturally loud. "Your father," she said, and her voice was different than I had ever heard it before, hollow and distant, like she was speaking from very far away. Then she looked up at me and her eyes were shining with unshed tears. "He left when I was pregnant with you because he said he didn't want to be tied down to a fat girl and her baby." The words hung in the air between us like physical objects. I felt them hit me one by one, each word a small impact that added up to something devastating. Finally, I had the missing piece of the puzzle, the thing that explained everything and nothing all at once. My father had left because of my mother's weight, and she had spent my entire life making sure the same thing could never happen to me by ensuring I was too heavy for anyone to want in the first place. "Is that why you lost all the weight?" I asked quietly. "After he left." She nodded slowly, her eyes still bright with tears that refused to fall. "I promised myself no one would ever have a reason to leave me again," she whispered. "I became the kind of woman men want to be with. Thin, beautiful, successful. Everything he said I wasn't. And it worked. People want me now. Men ask me out all the time. But it's all surface, Emily. None of them would have wanted the real me, the fat girl I used to be. But why did you want me to be heavy?" I pressed, even though I already knew the answer. "Why feed me differently? Why try to sabotage my weight loss?" The tears finally spilled over, running down her cheeks in silent streams. "Because I wanted to protect you," she said, and her voice broke on the words. "Boys can be so cruel about weight. They pretend to care about you, and then they leave when you're not perfect anymore. I thought if you were heavy, they wouldn't notice you. They wouldn't hurt you the way your father hurt me. You would never have to feel that rejection." I sat there stunned by the twisted logic of it all. In trying to protect me from heartbreak, she had guaranteed I would be miserable. In trying to shield me from rejection, she had ensured I would never even have the chance to be accepted. Her trauma had become my trauma passed down like some kind of cursed inheritance I had never asked for. Mom, I said as gently as I could manage, you can't protect me by making me unhealthy. And you can't protect me from life by trying to control my body. What Dad did to you was horrible, but that was about him being a terrible person, not about your weight. You've spent my whole life punishing me for his cruelty. She started crying harder, her shoulders shaking with the force of her sobs. I wanted to feel sorry for her, wanted to get up and comfort her the way I always had when she was upset. But I couldn't move. 17 years of manipulation and control sat between us like an invisible wall. I thought this conversation would change things. In movies and TV shows, this is the moment when everything shifts, when understanding leads to healing and forgiveness. The music swells, the characters hug, and somehow everything is okay again. But real life doesn't work that way. Real trauma doesn't disappear just because you've identified its source, and real patterns of behavior don't change just because someone cries about them. The very next morning, my mother was back to her tricks. When I came down for breakfast, she handed me a glass of orange juice that tasted wrong. Not spoiled exactly, but different, sweeter, with an almost syrupy consistency that coated my tongue. I took another sip, trying to place the flavor while noticing how intently she was watching me from across the table. That's when the pieces clicked into place. "Did you put something in this?" I asked, setting the glass down harder than necessary. Some juice sloshed onto the table, and I watched it spread across the wood, unnaturally thick and slow. My mother's face was a mask of innocence that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Just a little honey to sweeten it up," she said with a shrug. "I know how you like sweet things." I wanted to laugh at the obvious lie. I had never liked overly sweet drinks, and she knew it. I stood up and carried the glass to the sink, dumping the contents down the drain while she watched. The juice poured out in a thick stream, and I could smell the corn syrup now that I knew to look for it. When I turned back, she was still watching me with that same fake innocent expression. "I'm not thirsty anyway," I said, and left the kitchen without another word. Later that day, while she was at work, I searched through the pantry like a detective looking for clues. Sure enough, hidden behind her collection of organic herbal teas, I found a half-empty bottle of corn syrup, along with containers of weight gain powder, a jar of coconut oil, and what looked like pure sugar syrup. She had built herself an arsenal of calorie bombs to sneak into my food and drinks. The planning and premeditation of it all made my stomach turn. That weekend, she announced she was making my favorite lasagna for dinner. When she served it, I could see immediately that it had probably twice the amount of cheese as usual, the top layer so thick it hadn't even fully melted. I took a small portion, barely a quarter of what she had put on my plate, and her whole demeanor changed. "I spent hours making this special for you," she said, and tears actually appeared in her eyes. "Is this how you thank me for trying to take care of you?" The guilt trip might have worked a few weeks ago, but I was getting better at recognizing manipulation tactics. "I'm just not very hungry," I said, pushing the food around on my plate. "Maybe I'm coming down with something." She watched me like a hawk for the rest of the meal, her own food sitting untouched as she monitored every bite I did or didn't take. When I finally escaped to my room, I felt like I had just survived a battle. That night, I did what any modern teenager would do when faced with an impossible situation. I turned to the internet. I created a throwaway account on Reddit and posted my story on the relationships subreddit. Within an hour, I had dozens of responses, and most of them were telling me the same thing, that this was abuse, that I needed to get out, that no mother should treat their child this way. One comment stood out from the rest. A user named Health Coach Linda wrote a long response suggesting that instead of fighting my mother directly, I should try to enlist an ally. Someone my mother respected who might be able to talk sense into her. The comment made me think of my Aunt Teresa, my mother's older sister, who lived about 2 hours away. They weren't particularly close, but I knew my mother respected her opinion. I found Aunt Teresa's number in my mother's address book and called her the next day while my mother was at work. My hands were shaking as I dialed, and I almost hung up 3 times before the call connected. When she answered, her voice was warm and familiar, even though we only saw each other a few times a year. "Hi, Aunt Teresa," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's Emily. I need to talk to you about something." 20 minutes later, after I had spilled out the whole story in a rambling mess of words and tears, my aunt's voice came through the phone hard as steel. Your mother is doing what she asked, and I could hear the barely controlled anger in her tone. That girl, I swear to God, Emily, I'm coming down there this weekend. Don't tell her I'm coming. I want to see this for myself. Pack a bag just in case. The line went dead before I could ask what she meant by just in case. That Friday evening, I was in my room supposedly doing homework but really just staring at the same page in my textbook when I heard a car pull into our driveway. My mother wasn't expecting anyone, and I heard her footsteps moving toward the window to peek through the curtains. "What's Teresa doing here?" she muttered, and I could hear the anxiety in her voice even from upstairs. I crept to the top of the stairs to listen, my heart pounding so loud I was sure they would hear it. The doorbell rang, and after a long moment my mother opened it. "Teresa?" My mother's voice was high and false. "What a surprise, I didn't know you were." "We need to talk." Diane, Aunt Teresa cut her off, pushing past her into the house. "Family dinner, all three of us right now." The authority in her voice brooked no argument, and I heard my mother stammering excuses about not having enough food prepared. "Oh, please," Teresa said, and I could hear her moving toward the kitchen. "I know you've got enough food to feed an army. You always do." I came downstairs to find them in the dining room, Aunt Teresa already seated at the table like a judge preparing for trial. She looked exactly as I remembered, tall and imposing with the same sharp features as my mother, but with an air of confidence my mother's nervous energy could never match. "Sit," she commanded, and both my mother and I obeyed without question. Once we were all seated with plates of hastily reheated leftover Chinese food in front of us, Aunt Teresa waited until we had each taken a few bites before dropping her bomb. "So, Diane," she said, her voice deceptively casual, "your daughter tells me you've been trying to fatten her up. Care to explain what the hell that's about?" My mother's fork clattered onto her plate, the sound sharp in the sudden silence. The look my mother shot me was pure betrayal mixed with rage. I shrank in my seat, wanting to disappear, but Aunt Teresa wasn't having it. "Don't you dare look at her like that," she snapped. "This is about your behavior, not hers. Now answer the question." "I don't know what Emily told you my mother started, but I'm just trying to make sure she's eating enough. Teenagers these days are obsessed with being skinny, and I worry." "Cut the crap!" Aunt Teresa interrupted, reaching into her purse. She pulled out a stack of old photographs and spread them across the table. Photos I recognized from the albums I'd found in the attic. Photos of my mother as a heavy teenager. Photos of our grandparents who I barely remembered. "Remember how Dad used to make comments about your weight at dinner?" she asked, her voice softer now but no less intense. "Remember how Mum put you on those crash diets that never worked? Remember how miserable you were?" I sat in shocked silence as they argued about family history I had never known. Apparently my grandfather had been cruel about my mother's weight, constantly making comments and comparing her to other girls. My grandmother had responded by putting her on increasingly extreme diets that only made things worse. The yo-yo dieting had damaged her metabolism and her self-esteem in equal measure. "You hated them for it," Aunt Teresa said quietly. "You used to cry in my room at night about how they made you feel. And now you're doing something just as harmful to your own daughter. Just in reverse." For a moment I thought my mother might actually understand. Her face crumpled and tears started flowing, and she looked genuinely remorseful. But then she stood up so abruptly her chair tipped backward, hitting the floor with a crash that made us all jump. "This is different," she shouted, her face red and blotchy from crying. "I'm protecting her. The world is cruel to overweight people, especially women. If she's heavy enough, they won't notice her. They won't use her and leave her like—" She stopped abruptly, but we all knew how that sentence was supposed to end. "Like Emily's father did to you," Teresa finished quietly. "That's what this is really about, isn't it?" My mother fled the room, slamming her bedroom door so hard the pictures on the walls rattled. Aunt Teresa sighed and turned to me with sad eyes. "I'm sorry you had to hear all that she said. Your mother has more trauma than I realized. That explains some things, but it doesn't excuse them. Come on, let's clean up, and then we need to talk about next steps." As we cleared the table and washed dishes together, Aunt Teresa told me more about their childhood, about how their father had been obsessed with appearances, with having perfect daughters who would marry well. How he had focused all that pressure on my mother as the younger, prettier daughter, while largely ignoring Teresa, who had inherited what he called the family's sturdy build. The different treatment had driven a wedge between the sisters that had never fully healed. By the time we finished cleaning the kitchen, my mother still hadn't emerged from her room. Aunt Teresa made us tea and we sat at the clean table while she pulled out her phone. "I'm going to give you my credit card," she said, typing something into an app. "There's $500 on it for emergencies. If things get worse, if you feel unsafe at any point, you call me and I'll come get you immediately. Do you understand?" I nodded, feeling tears prick at my eyes. The validation that this situation was as bad as I thought it was, combined with having an actual escape plan, made me feel safer than I had in weeks. Aunt Teresa stayed the rest of the weekend sleeping in our guest room and trying repeatedly to talk to my mother, who refused to come out except to use the bathroom. By Sunday afternoon, she had to leave for work Monday morning. She hugged me tight at the door, pressing the credit card into my hand. "Remember what I said," she whispered. "Any time, day or night, you call me. And Emily, you're stronger than you know. Don't let her break you down." I watched her drive away, feeling like my lifeline was disappearing, but also somehow more empowered than before. I wasn't alone in this anymore. When my mother finally emerged from her room 10 minutes after Teresa's car had disappeared, she looked haggard. Her eyes were red and puffy from crying, her usually perfect hair a tangled mess. But there was something else in her expression too, a hardness that made my chest tight with anxiety. "Teresa always was a drama queen," she said flatly, "always trying to turn people against me. First, our parents loved her version of events better, and now she's trying to steal you too." The weeks that followed were a special kind of psychological torture. My mother stopped the obvious food tampering but replaced it with something worse. She began leaving eating disorder pamphlets around the house, open to pages about the dangers of rapid weight loss. She would make comments whenever I ate anything healthy about how she hoped I wasn't developing an unhealthy relationship with food. When I skipped dessert, she would sigh dramatically and say things like, "I just hope you're not heading down a dangerous path." The gaslighting was insidious and constant. She would add butter to my portion of vegetables, then deny it completely when I confronted her. "You're getting paranoid, honey," she would say with fake concern. "Maybe we should talk to someone about these delusions you're having." It was like living in a house of mirrors where nothing was real and everything could be twisted to make me seem crazy. I started keeping all my own food in a plastic container in my closet. Protein bars and apples and bags of almonds that wouldn't spoil. I would pretend to eat her meals, then scrape them into napkins when she wasn't looking and flush them down the toilet later. It felt wasteful and wrong, but I didn't know what else to do. The alternative was letting her win, and I had come too far to give up now. One evening I came home late from what I had told her was a library study session, but was actually a workout at the school gym. The house was strangely quiet as I let myself in, and I found my mother sitting at the kitchen table with another woman I didn't recognize. They both looked up when I entered, and my mother's face shifted into an expression of maternal concern that immediately put me on guard. "Honey, this is Dr. Reynolds," my mother said in a syrupy, sweet voice that made my skin crawl. "She's a nutritionist who specializes in teenage eating disorders. I thought it would be good for you two to chat." The woman smiled at me with the kind of fake warmth that immediately told me she was in on whatever game my mother was playing. Her credentials were probably as real as my mother's concern. I sat down because refusing would only make things worse and listened as this Dr. Reynolds lectured me about intuitive eating and nourishing my body and all sorts of wellness buzzwords that meant nothing. She talked about how restriction leads to binging and how the diet mentality was dangerous for developing minds, all while my mother nodded along with this deeply concerned expression, like she was just so worried about her poor daughter's relationship with food. After the fake doctor left, I couldn't contain my anger anymore. "What was that about?" I demanded. "You know exactly why I'm being careful about what I eat. It's because you keep trying to make me gain weight." My mother's expression shifted from fake concern to something colder. "See," she said triumphantly, "this obsession with weight isn't healthy. Dr. Reynolds thinks you might need more intensive help, maybe even inpatient treatment. The threat hung in the air between us. Inpatient treatment. She was threatening to have me sent away to some facility because I wouldn't let her control my body anymore. I didn't know if she could actually do it, but the possibility terrified me. I was still a minor for another 8 months. Did she have the power to have me committed somewhere against my will? The thought kept me awake that night, my mind racing through worst-case scenarios. The next morning, I decided to change tactics completely. If direct resistance was leading to escalating threats, then maybe I needed to be smarter about how I fought back. So I put on my best acting performance at breakfast. "Mum," I said, pushing my cereal around in my bowl, "you might be right. I think I have been getting a little obsessed with food lately. Maybe I do need help." The transformation in her face was instantaneous. The hard, suspicious look melted away, replaced by something that looked almost like joy. "Oh, sweetie," she breathed, reaching across the table to grab my hand. "I'm so glad you're finally seeing it. We'll get through this together, I promise. Everything is going to be okay now." She immediately got up and put 2 Pop-Tarts in the toaster, adding them to my barely touched cereal. For the next week, I pretended to go along with everything. I ate the huge portions she served me. I smiled through her lectures about body positivity that were really just thinly veiled attempts to convince me that gaining weight was healthy. I even agreed when she suggested I should cut back on exercise because it was becoming compulsive. But every moment she wasn't watching, I was researching, planning, preparing for my escape. I found out that in Ohio, I couldn't legally move out until I was 18 without parental consent, or unless I could prove abuse. But proving emotional and psychological abuse was nearly impossible, especially when the perpetrator was providing food and shelter and presenting herself as a concerned mother. So I focused on what I could control. I would turn 18 in 8 months. I needed to be ready to leave the moment I legally could. I applied for every scholarship I could find, focusing on schools at least 2 states away. I wrote essays late at night with my door locked, explaining how my life experiences had taught me resilience and determination without going into the ugly details. I researched work-study programs and cheap housing options. I even started selling clothes I didn't wear anymore online, storing the money in the bank account Zoe had helped me set up that my mother didn't know about. My friend Zoe became my lifeline during this time. She was the only person at school who knew the full story, and she helped me in ways I could never fully repay. She would bring extra food to school that I could eat safely. She helped me research colleges and scholarships. Most importantly, she believed me when I told her what was happening at home. That validation kept me sane when my mother's gaslighting made me question my own reality. I also picked up a part-time job at a pretzel stand in the mall, telling my mother it was a social skills enrichment program recommended by the school counselor. She believed it because she wanted to believe that I was getting help for my eating disorder. The irony of working at a food court while secretly battling my mother's attempts to control my eating wasn't lost on me. But the job gave me income and, more importantly, time away from home. For a while, this delicate balance held. I pretended to be recovering from my fictional eating disorder while secretly maintaining my weight and saving money. My mother seemed satisfied with my apparent compliance, and the obvious tension in our house eased slightly. I started to believe I could make it through the next 8 months until I turned 18 and could legally leave. Then, one Saturday afternoon, everything fell apart. I had told my mother I was at my social skills group, but had actually gotten sick at work and been sent home early. My manager at the pretzel stand was understanding about it, saying I looked pale and should rest. I drove home expecting the house to be empty since my mother always did her grocery shopping on Saturday afternoons. But as I climbed the stairs to my room, I could hear sounds coming from inside, rustling noises and drawers opening and closing. My door was closed but not locked since I had been in a rush that morning. I pushed it open to find my mother on her knees in front of my closet, the plastic container of food I had hidden dumped out across the floor. Protein bar wrappers and apple cores and empty almond packages scattered like evidence at a crime scene. In her hands were the bank statements I had stupidly hidden in the same container. Her face as she looked up at me was a mask of cold fury. "What is all this?" she demanded, waving the papers at me. "You've been working at Pretzel Palace. You have a secret bank account. You've been lying to me this entire time. The accusation of lying would have been funny if the situation wasn't so serious." She had been lying to me my entire life. "You're planning to leave," she continued, and her voice was eerily calm now. "That's what all this is about, isn't it? The job, the money, the hidden food. You're planning to abandon me just like everyone else, just like your father, just like Teresa trying to poison you against me. You're going to leave me all alone." The parallel to my father stung even though I knew it was manipulation. I wasn't abandoning her by wanting to live my own life. "I'm almost 18, I said quietly. "I need to start preparing for college for independence. It's not about leaving you, it's about growing up." She laughed, but there was no humour in it, just a bitter sound that made me flinch. "Growing up? You're still a child, Emily. You can't even feed yourself properly without my help. Look at this," she gestured at the scattered food supplies. "Hiding food like some kind of addict. This just proves you need help." That night, my mother took everything. My phone, my laptop, my car keys, even my library card. She called them triggers that were enabling my disorder. She informed me that she had already called the pretzel stand and told them I had to quit for health reasons. She would be driving me to and from school every day to ensure I wasn't engaging in any destructive behaviours. I was essentially under house arrest. For 3 days, I moved through life like a zombie. I went to school but couldn't concentrate on anything. I ate whatever she put in front of me because fighting seemed pointless. I felt completely trapped with no way to contact Aunt Teresa or Zoe or anyone who might help. The walls of my childhood home had become a prison, and my mother was both the warden and the only other inmate. On the 4th day, my English teacher, Ms. Garcia, kept me after class. She was young, maybe late 20s, with kind eyes and an open face that made students trust her. "Emily," she said once the other students had left, "is everything okay? You seem really disconnected lately. This isn't like you." Something about her genuine concern broke through the numbness I had wrapped around myself like armor. Before I could stop myself, I was crying. Sobbing, actually, right there in her empty classroom while she handed me tissues and made soothing noises. The whole story poured out in a jumbled mess. The forced feeding, the gaslighting, the threats of treatment facilities, the current imprisonment. I told her everything, watching her expression shift from concern to alarm to carefully controlled anger. When I finally ran out of words and tears, Ms. Garcia was quiet for a long moment. Then she said very clearly, "This is not normal, Emily. This is not okay. What your mother is doing is abuse, even if she believes she's protecting you. There are resources that can help. Would you like me to help you contact someone?" The relief of having an adult take me seriously was overwhelming. "Yes," I whispered, "please." She let me use her classroom phone to call Aunt Teresa during lunch. When my aunt answered, I could barely get the words out through my tears, but I managed to explain what had happened. The silence on the other end when I finished was deafening. Then Aunt Teresa's voice came through the line, vibrating with fury. "This has gone too far," she said. "I'm calling your grandmother. We're having a family intervention. Your mother needs more help than I can provide." Grandmother. I barely knew my maternal grandmother. She lived in Florida and sent Christmas cards with checks, but we rarely saw her. According to my mother, they weren't close because grandmother was judgmental and critical. But given everything I had learned about my mother's version of events, I wondered how much of that was true. Maybe grandmother had tried to help and been pushed away just like Aunt Teresa. 2 agonizing days later, I watched from my bedroom window as 2 cars pulled into our driveway. First came a silver sedan that had to be a rental from the airport. Then Aunt Teresa's familiar SUV. 2 women got out and met in the driveway. Even from a distance, I could see the family resemblance. Grandmother was tiny, maybe 5 feet tall, but she carried herself like someone much larger. They conferred briefly, then marched toward our front door like an army of 2. My mother must have seen them coming because I heard her footsteps rushing down the stairs. By the time the doorbell rang, she was already at the door, but I could hear the panic in her voice through my bedroom floor. "Mother," she said, and the word came out strangled. This really isn't a good time. Diane Marie came the response in a voice that brooked no argument. You will open this door right now, or I swear I will call every neighbor on this street to witness what happens next. The family meeting that followed was like watching a therapy session crossed with a courtroom trial. We all sat in the living room, my grandmother in my father's old recliner like a judge on her bench. Aunt Teresa laid out everything I had told her with me, filling in details when asked. My mother kept trying to interrupt, to explain, to justify, to minimize, but grandmother just held up one imperious hand each time, silencing her. When we had finished the whole sordid tale, my grandmother turned to my mother with eyes that held decades of pain. Diane, she said quietly, do you remember what you told me when you were 17 years old? Do you remember standing in my kitchen crying and saying that if you ever had a daughter, you would never do to her what I did to you? My mother's face crumpled like paper, and suddenly she looked exactly like the sad teenager in those photos. This is different, she whispered, but even she didn't sound convinced anymore. No, my grandmother said, firmly. It's not different. It's worse. I controlled your food because that's what mothers did in my generation. We thought we were helping. We didn't know better. But you know exactly what you're doing. You're deliberately keeping her heavy to control her, to keep her dependent on you. That's not protection, Diane. That's prison. For the first time since this all started, my mother had no comeback. She just sat there, tears streaming down her face, looking lost and broken, and younger than I had ever seen her. Grandmother turned to me next, and her expression softened. Amber, she said. And I was about to correct her about my name when I realized she was looking at me with such knowing that the words died in my throat. I owe you an apology too. I should have been more involved in your life. I let old wounds keep me away, and you suffered for it. The plan they worked out was swift and non-negotiable. I would finish my senior year living with Aunt Teresa. My mother would start therapy immediately with a real therapist who specialized in trauma and eating disorders. Not some holistic coach or nutritionist, but an actual psychologist. Once her therapist felt she had made progress, we could try family sessions. But until then, contact would be limited and supervised. As I packed my things that night, my mother appeared in my doorway. She looked hollow, like something essential had been scooped out of her, leaving only the shell. I really thought I was protecting you, she said so quietly I almost didn't hear her. I thought if you were heavy, no one could hurt you the way I was hurt. I thought I was keeping you safe. I paused with a stack of t-shirts in my hands, considering my words carefully. I know you believe that, I said finally. But Mom, you can't protect someone by controlling them. You can't keep me safe by making me sick. And you can't heal your own wounds by inflicting them on me. She flinched at the last words, but nodded slowly. Your father, she began, then stopped and started again. He really did leave because of my weight. He said I had tricked him by getting pregnant, that he hadn't signed up for a fat wife and a baby. Then he was a cruel man who didn't deserve you, I said firmly. And his cruelty was about his character, not your weight. You've spent so many years believing his lies that you made them real. You became thin, but you're still living like that rejected girl. You're still letting him control you. And through you, he's been controlling me too. Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. When did you become so wise, she asked. I had to, I replied. The survival made me grow up fast. We stood there for a moment, two women separated by 17 years and a lifetime of mistakes. Then she stepped forward and hugged me. It was awkward and tentative, but real in a way our interactions hadn't been in months. I'm sorry, Emily, she whispered into my hair. I'm so very sorry. The apology didn't fix everything. It didn't erase the years of manipulation or the months of torment. But it was a start. Living with Aunt Teresa was like stepping into an alternate universe where food was just food and weight was just a number, and mothers didn't try to control their daughters' bodies. Her house was smaller than the one I had grown up in, but it felt infinitely larger because I could breathe there. I could exist without constantly monitoring what I ate or how I looked, or whether my choices would trigger another round of psychological warfare. The first night, she sat me down with a cup of tea and a notebook. House rules, she said with a smile. Number 1, you make your own food choices. I keep the kitchen stocked. You eat what you want, when you want. Number 2, we talk about things. If something bothers you, we discuss it like adults. Number 3, you're 17 going on 18, so I'm going to treat you that way. Freedom comes with responsibility, but I trust you to handle both. The relief was overwhelming. For the first time in my memory, I could just eat when I was hungry, stop when I was full, and not think about food constantly in between. I could exercise because it felt good, not because I was secretly trying to burn off calories. I could wear clothes that fit my body without wondering if they would trigger comments or concerns. I could just be a normal teenager worried about normal teenage things. My mother started therapy the following week. Her therapist recommended minimal contact for the first month while she worked through what he called significant unprocessed trauma. I was relieved to have the space to process my own feelings without having to manage hers too. I started seeing the school counselor who helped me understand that what I had experienced was a form of abuse, even though it came wrapped in maternal concern. When we finally had our first supervised family session 6 weeks later, my mother looked different. Not physically, although she seemed smaller somehow sitting in the therapist's beige office. But there was something in her eyes that hadn't been there before. A kind of awareness, like she was truly seeing me for the first time in years. She had written me a letter as part of her therapy, and she handed it to me with shaking hands. "I don't expect forgiveness," she said quietly. "But I want you to know that I understand now what I did to you. I turned you into a weapon against my own trauma. I made your body a battlefield for my own wars. That was wrong, and I'm working to understand why I did it so I never do it again." I took the letter but didn't read it until later that night in the safety of my room at Aunt Teresa's house. Life gradually found a new rhythm. I went to school and work and therapy. I submitted college applications and scholarship essays. I spent time with friends without having to lie about where I was going. I ate meals without anxiety and exercised without shame. Slowly, I began to feel like a real person again instead of just a character in my mother's drama. The eating disorder she had been so convinced I had never materialized because it had never existed in the first place. When prom season arrived, I almost didn't plan to go. School dances still carried the weight of all those years when I was too heavy and too self-conscious to even consider attending. But Zoe convinced me that I deserved to have those normal teenage experiences. We went dress shopping together, and I found a vintage emerald green dress that made me feel like a character from a fairy tale. The girl in the mirror when I tried it on was confident and healthy and whole. The night of prom, as Aunt Teresa helped me with my hair, she mentioned casually that my mother had called. "She wanted to bring you something," she said carefully. "I told her she could stop by for a few minutes if you're comfortable with that. It's entirely your choice." I considered it, weighing my curiosity against my need for self-protection. Finally, I nodded. "Okay," I said, "but you stay with me." Of course, Aunt Teresa agreed. When my mother arrived, she looked nervous, standing on the doorstep of her sister's house like a stranger. She was holding a small gift bag, and her hands were trembling slightly. "You look beautiful," she said when she saw me, and for once the comment felt genuine without hidden meanings or agenda. Just a mother seeing her daughter dressed up and being moved by it. "Thank you," I said simply. She handed me the bag, and inside was a delicate silver bracelet with a small charm. "It's a phoenix," she explained, "rising from the ashes." I thought, given everything that's happened, it seemed appropriate. "You've been so strong through all of this, stronger than I ever was." I fastened the bracelet around my wrist, watching the charm catch the light. "It's beautiful," I said, and meant it. We didn't hug. We weren't there yet and might never be. But as she left, she paused at the door and looked back. "I'm proud of you, Emily," she said. "Not for how you look. Not for your weight, not for any of the reasons I used to think mattered. I'm proud of who you are, the person you've become despite everything I did wrong, and I'm grateful you're letting me try to be better even if I don't deserve it." Graduation day dawned bright and clear. I stood in Aunt Teresa's bathroom, straightening my cap and adjusting my honor cords. I had worked hard for those academic achievements, even through everything that had happened. My acceptance letter to State University was pinned to the mirror, a tangible reminder that my future was my own to shape. The partial scholarship I had earned would help with costs, and I had already lined up a work-study position in the library. The ceremony itself was a blur of speeches and applause and trying not to trip in my heels crossing the stage. But what stood out was looking into the audience and seeing my small, complicated family there together. Aunt Teresa beaming with pride. My grandmother who had flown up from Florida dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. And my mother sitting very still with her hands folded in her lap, watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Afterward, we all went to dinner at a restaurant I had chosen. The conversation was slightly stilted at first, everyone being carefully polite and avoiding difficult topics. But gradually we found a rhythm talking about college plans and my summer job and safe, neutral things. My mother didn't comment on what anyone ordered. She didn't watch what I ate. She seemed to be working very hard to be present without being controlling. As dessert arrived chocolate cake that I ordered because I wanted it, not because someone was forcing it on me, my mother cleared her throat. "I've been thinking," she said, addressing the table but looking at me about what happens next. "Emily will be going to college and starting her own life, and I need to figure out who I am when I'm not trying to control someone else." Her therapist had clearly been working with her on this. "I was thinking," she continued nervously, "maybe once you're settled at school we could have lunch once a month, just to catch up." "Only if you want to," she rushed to add. "And I would always call first, and you can always say no. I promise to respect your boundaries." The whole table waited for my response. I could feel Aunt Teresa ready to jump in if needed, and my grandmother watching with sharp eyes. Maybe I said finally, "Let me get through the first semester and see how things go. But I'm willing to try if you're willing to keep working on yourself." The relief on her face was almost painful to see. "Thank you," she whispered. "That's more than fair. And I want you all to know," she added, looking around the table, "that I'm committed to therapy, to understanding why I did what I did and making sure I never do it again." The summer passed in a blur of preparation and change. I worked full-time at a coffee shop near Aunt Teresa's house, saving money for college. I spent evenings with friends knowing we would all be scattering to different schools soon. I went running in the mornings because I had discovered I actually loved the feeling of my body in motion, the strength and capability I had never known was there when I was heavier. My mother invited me to dinner a few times, always at restaurants, never at the house that held so many difficult memories. The conversations were careful and surface level, but not unpleasant. She told me about her therapy, about realizing how her father's cruelty and her mother's enabling had shaped her relationship with food and control. She was working on understanding why she had reversed the pattern with me, using food as a weapon in the opposite direction. One evening in late July, she asked if I would help her go through some things at the house before I left for college. There were items she thought I might want to take with me, and others she wanted to donate as part of what she called her fresh start. I agreed, partly out of curiosity and partly because I thought it might provide some kind of closure to that chapter of our lives. We started in my old room, which she had already begun converting to a home office. My childhood things were boxed up, neatly labelled, and waiting for me to decide what to keep. As we sorted through years of accumulated stuff, we found ourselves talking more naturally than we had in months. She told me stories about when I was little that I had never heard before. Happy memories that predated all the food and weight drama. Then we moved to the attic to look for any other items I might want. The dusty space felt different now, less like a crime scene where I had discovered evidence, and more like just a storage area full of family history. We found photo albums I had never seen, including pictures of my mother's grandmother, my great-grandmother, who had apparently been a force of nature in her own right. She was a suffragette, my mother said, showing me a sepia photograph of a stern-looking woman in early 20th century dress. Fought for women's right to vote, chained herself to buildings, the whole thing. My grandmother used to say I inherited her stubborn streak. She paused, then added quietly, "I think you got it too. That strength. You just used it better than I did." As we packed up boxes to take to Aunt Teresa's house, my mother asked suddenly, "Do you think you'll ever want to find him? Your father?" The question caught me off guard. We had barely talked about my father beyond that one revealing conversation about why he left. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "Maybe someday, but not now." I have enough to figure out without adding him to the mix. She nodded, seeming relieved. If you ever do, I have some information that might help. But only when you're ready. No pressure. Oh. College move-in day arrived faster than seemed possible. Aunt Teresa drove me the 3 hours to campus with my mother following in her own car. They helped me unload boxes and set up my tiny half of an already tiny dorm room. My roommate Madison seemed nice, chattering nervously about her own anxieties, while we all pretended this was perfectly normal and not a massive life change. When everything was unpacked and the beds were made and there was nothing left to delay the inevitable goodbye, Aunt Teresa hugged me first. "You call me anytime," she said firmly. "Day or night for any reason, even if you just need to hear a familiar voice. This isn't goodbye, it's just see you later. And remember, you always have a home with me. Always." I hugged her back, breathing in her familiar perfume, feeling safer just knowing she existed. My mother hung back until Aunt Teresa stepped away to give us privacy. Then she moved forward hesitantly, like she wasn't sure she was allowed. "I'm proud of you," she said again, and I realized she had been saying it a lot lately, like she was trying to make up for all the years she hadn't. "This is a big step, and you're handling it beautifully. I have something for you." She pulled out an envelope. "It's not money," she said quickly, seeing my expression. "It's information. My therapist's name and number. Some resources for the counseling center here." And she hesitated, then continued, "The contact information you asked about, for if you ever want it. No pressure, just options." I took the envelope, feeling the weight of what it represented. Possibilities and choices and the freedom to make my own decisions about all of it. "Thank you," I said, and meant it. "For this and for working on yourself. I know it hasn't been easy." "No," she agreed, "it hasn't. But it's been necessary. And Emily, I want you to know that whatever happens next, wherever life takes you, you don't owe me anything. No visits if you don't want them, no phone calls if they're too hard, no relationship if that's what you need. Your healing comes first. Always." We hugged then. A real hug that felt like both an ending and a beginning. When she pulled away, her eyes were wet, but she was smiling. "Go," she said, making a shooing motion with her hands. "Go start your adventure. I'm betting it's going to be amazing." As I watched them drive away my mother's car, following Aunt Teresa's like she still needed her older sister to lead the way, I felt a complex mix of emotions I couldn't quite name. That night, Madison and I went to a freshman mixer in the common room. There were awkward introductions and bad pizza and nervous laughter as everyone tried to pretend they weren't terrified. I loaded my plate with food, choosing what looked good without calculating calories or worrying about anyone watching. When Madison asked about my family, I gave her the simple version: divorced parents raised by my mom living with my aunt for senior year. All true if incomplete. Later, alone in my narrow dorm bed, I pulled out the journal my mother had given me for graduation. I wrote about my first day of college, about my hopes and fears and plans. I wrote about the boy down the hall with the nice smile who had helped me figure out how to use the communal microwave. I wrote about my classes starting tomorrow and my work-study job starting next week. I wrote about the future sprawling out ahead of me, full of possibility. I thought about my mother somewhere on the highway driving back to her empty house. I hoped she would be okay. I hoped therapy would help her find peace with her past and build a healthier future. I hoped someday we could have a relationship built on mutual respect instead of control and manipulation. But I also knew that her healing wasn't my responsibility. I had my own journey to focus on now. The bracelet she had given me caught the light from my desk lamp as I wrote, a phoenix rising from the ashes. It seemed fitting. I had been burned by the very person who was supposed to protect me. But I had survived. More than that, I had learned to fly. And now, with my whole life ahead of me, I was ready to soar as high and far as my wings would carry me. The next morning, I woke up to my alarm and got ready for my first college classes. I put on jeans that fit and a shirt I liked, and went to the dining hall for breakfast. I ate eggs and fruit and toast with butter, making choices based on what sounded good and what would give me energy for the day ahead. Around me, hundreds of other freshmen were doing the same thing, all of us figuring out how to be adults in this strange new world. As I walked across campus to my first class introduction to psychology, which seemed appropriate given everything I reflected on how far I had come. A year ago, I had been trapped in a house where food was a weapon and love was conditional on compliance. Now I was free to make my own choices and mistakes and discoveries. The path hadn't been easy, and the scars, both physical and emotional, would take time to fully heal. But I had made it. My phone buzzed with a text from Zoe wishing me luck on my first day. Another from Aunt Teresa reminding me she loved me. Even one from my grandmother telling me to study hard and make the family proud. Nothing from my mother, but that was okay. We were both learning new ways to exist in the world. Her without someone to control, and me without someone trying to control me. It would take time to find our balance. I slipped into the lecture hall and found a seat, pulling out my notebook and pen. The professor began talking about the complexity of human behavior, about nature versus nurture, about how our past shapes but doesn't have to define our future. I took notes thinking about my own story and how it fit into these theories. About generational trauma and breaking cycles and the courage it takes to choose differently than those who came before us. During a break, I stepped outside to get some air. The campus was beautiful in the morning light, all old buildings and tree-lined paths and possibilities. Other students hurried past, carrying coffee and backpacks and their own untold stories. I wondered how many of them were also escaping from something or running towards something or both. How many were rewriting their own narratives and refusing to be defined by their pasts? My phone rang and I saw it was my mother calling. I hesitated then, let it go to voicemail. I would listen later when I was ready. For now, I needed to focus on the present, on this moment, on this new chapter. The past would always be there, part of my story, part of what made me who I was. But it didn't own me anymore. I owned myself, my choices, my body, my future. And that freedom was worth everything it had cost to claim it. The day continued with more classes, more new faces, more opportunities to reinvent myself. By evening, I was exhausted but exhilarated. Madison and I compared schedules and complained about the amount of reading already assigned. We debated whether to check out a party someone had mentioned or just stay in and watch movies. Normal college decisions that felt like small miracles after everything I had been through. That night, I called Aunt Teresa to tell her about my day. She listened with enthusiasm, asking questions and offering encouragement. When I mentioned my mother had called, she was quiet for a moment, then said, "You know you don't have to answer every time, or any time if you're not ready. Boundaries are healthy, Emily. Use them." I promised I would and meant it. Learning to protect myself was just as important as learning to forgive. Before bed, I finally listened to my mother's voicemail. Her voice was careful and contained. "Hi, sweetie, just wanted to see how your first day went. No pressure to call back, I know you're busy. I just wanted you to know I'm thinking about you. I'm proud of you. Okay, that's all. I love you." It was short and respectful of boundaries and completely different from how she would have handled it 6 months ago. Progress. I thought about calling her back but decided to wait until tomorrow. Tonight was for me, for processing this huge transition, for settling into my new space, both physical and emotional. I brushed my teeth in the communal bathroom and changed into pajamas and climbed into my narrow bed. Through the thin walls, I could hear other students talking and laughing and living their lives. I was part of it now, this community, this experience, this freedom. As I drifted off to sleep, I thought about the girl I had been a year ago. Trapped and controlled and made to feel that her worth was tied to her weight. That girl felt like a different person now, someone I knew intimately but was no longer. I had shed her like an old skin, emerging new and raw and real. The transformation had been painful but necessary. And now, here I was, exactly where I was supposed to be. The weeks turned into months, and college life became my new normal. I made friends and joined clubs and discovered I was actually good at psychology. My professors praised my insights and my ability to connect theory to real-world experiences. I wondered sometimes if they knew how personal those connections were, how lived in my understanding of trauma and recovery, and human resilience truly was. My mother and I developed a new rhythm. She would text every few days, just checking in without demanding responses. I would reply when I felt like it, which gradually became more often. We had video calls once a month where she showed me her therapy homework, and I told her about my classes. The conversations were still careful but less strained. We were learning how to be mother and daughter without the weight of our history crushing every interaction. Thanksgiving approached, and with it the question of where to spend the holiday. Aunt Teresa immediately insisted I come to her house. My grandmother was flying up from Florida to join us. My mother would be invited for dinner but not overnight. It seemed like a reasonable compromise, a way to be together without the pressure of pretending everything was normal. I agreed, grateful to have the buffer of other family members. The drive back to Ohio felt strange. I was returning to places that knew the old me, but as this new version of myself. Even stopping at a familiar gas station felt different because I was different. The girl who had left 3 months ago, desperate for escape, had been replaced by a young woman who was choosing to return. The distinction mattered more than I could articulate. Aunt Teresa's house smelled like pie when I arrived. She hugged me tight and told me I looked happy. Healthy, she said, and it wasn't about weight but about the light in my eyes and the confidence in my posture. My grandmother arrived shortly after, full of stories about her retirement community and the drama of her bridge club. She examined me with those sharp eyes and nodded approvingly. "You've grown," she said, and we both knew she didn't mean physically. When my mother arrived for dinner, she looked nervous. She had brought wine and flowers and a green bean casserole that she placed on the table like an offering. The meal itself was pleasant enough. We talked about safe topics, school and work and the weather. But underneath the polite conversation was the awareness of everything that had changed. We were the same people around the same table, but the dynamics had shifted fundamentally. After dinner, while my grandmother and Aunt Teresa cleaned up, insisting we didn't need to help, my mother and I found ourselves alone on the back porch. The November air was cold but not unbearable. We stood side by side looking out at the yard where I had spent so many hours that spring, learning to exist without her constant oversight. The silence between us was heavy with unspoken words. "I've been thinking," she said finally, "about selling the house. It's too big for just me, and there are too many memories." "Not all bad," she added quickly but complicated. "I think a fresh start might be good." I nodded, understanding the impulse. Sometimes physical spaces held too much history to be reclaimed. "Where would you go?" I asked. She smiled slightly. "I've been looking at condos downtown. Closer to work, easier to maintain. Something that's just mine." The idea of my childhood home being sold should have upset me, but instead I felt relief. That house with its kitchen battlefield and hidden surveillance and emotional landmines could belong to someone else. Some family who would fill it with different memories, happier ones. My mother and I could both move forward unburdened by the physical reminder of our worst moments together. "I'm also thinking about dating," she said suddenly, then blushed like a teenager. "My therapist thinks I'm ready to try. It's been so long since your father." The mention of him hung in the air between us. "Have you thought any more about—" she started, but I cut her off gently. "Not yet," I said. "Someday maybe, but not yet. I need more time to figure out who I am first." She nodded, accepting this without argument. Another sign of progress. When I hugged her goodbye that night, it felt almost natural. Almost like we were just a normal mother and daughter navigating the typical adjustments of a child leaving for college. Almost. But the ghosts of who we had been were still there, watching from the shadows. Recovery wasn't a straight line, and forgiveness wasn't a destination, but a journey we would be on for years to come. But we were on it, and that was something. Back at school, I threw myself into finals and papers and the controlled chaos of the end of semester. My grades were good, better than good, actually. I had discovered that I loved learning when my mind wasn't consumed with survival. My psychology professor pulled me aside after our last class to tell me about research opportunities for next semester. "You have a gift for this field," she said. "I hope you'll consider pursuing it further." That night, I called my mother to tell her about the research opportunity. Her excitement seemed genuine. "Psychology makes sense for you," she said. "You understand people in a way I never did. You see beneath the surface." Maybe that's why you saw through me." The acknowledgement sat between us for a moment, then she added, "I'm glad you did, even though it hurt." We needed it. I needed it. Winter break brought new challenges. I stayed with Aunt Teresa but spent more time with my mother. We went shopping together and she didn't comment on sizes or styles. We baked cookies and she let me eat as many or as few as I wanted. We watched old movies and talked about memories from when I was little, before everything got complicated. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments of tension and awkwardness, but it was progress. One afternoon, she asked if I wanted to see her new condo. She had put an offer on a place and wanted my opinion. We drove downtown to a modern building with lots of windows and clean lines. The space was smaller than our old house, but brighter somehow. Less room for shadows to hide. "This would be your room when you visit," she said, showing me a small second bedroom. "If you want to visit." No pressure. I looked around the empty room, imagining it with furniture. A bed for breaks, a desk for studying, a place that could be mine without the weight of history. "I like it," I said, and meant it. "It suits you. Fresh start and all that." She smiled, and for the first time in over a year, it reached her eyes completely. No shadows or agenda, just happiness. Fresh start, she agreed. For both of us. Spring semester started with new classes and new challenges. I threw myself into the research project my professor had recommended, studying the effects of childhood trauma on adult relationships. The irony wasn't lost on me, but I found the work fascinating. Understanding the science behind what had happened in my family helped me process it in new ways. Knowledge became another form of healing. My mother and I continued our monthly video calls. She started dating someone, a fellow realtor named David, who seemed nice enough. She was careful not to push too hard for my approval, just sharing little details when I asked. "He knows about everything she told me once, about you and therapy and all of it. He says I'm brave for working on myself. I think he might be a keeper. I dated too. Nothing serious, just coffee dates and study sessions that turned into something more. It felt revolutionary to make choices about my body and who had access to it without anyone else's input. To kiss someone because I wanted to, not because I was seeking validation. To end things when they weren't working without drama or manipulation. Every healthy interaction taught me more about what I deserved. Summer arrived with decisions to make. Aunt Teresa offered her home as always, but I had also been accepted for a paid internship at a psychology clinic near campus. Staying would mean independence and professional development. Going home would mean family and free rent. I wrestled with the choice until my mother surprised me. "Stay," she said when I asked her opinion. "This is your time to build your life. We'll be here when you visit." So I stayed subletting a tiny apartment with 2 other girls and throwing myself into the internship. The work was hard, shadowing therapists and learning about different therapeutic approaches. But it felt important, like I was learning not just for a career, but for myself. Understanding how therapy worked from the professional side helped me appreciate my own journey and my mother's ongoing work. We visited twice that summer. Once for 4th of July when I introduced her to my roommates and we watched fireworks from the roof of my building. She brought pasta salad and didn't watch what I put on my plate. We talked about her work and mine, about books we were reading, about everything except food or weight or control. It felt almost normal. The second visit was for her birthday when I surprised her by coming home. That visit was harder. Being in the new condo was fine, but we made the mistake of driving past our old house which had a sold sign in the yard. The sight hit us both unexpectedly. All those years, all those battles, all those moments, both good and bad, being packed up for someone else. We sat in the car in silence until she said, "I'm sorry for all of it." And I said, "I know. Me too." Then we drove away and didn't look back. Senior year started with the pressure of graduate school applications and thesis projects, and figuring out what came next. My research on intergenerational trauma had evolved into a full thesis project. My advisor said it was graduate-level work and encouraged me to apply to top programs. The girl who had once hidden in baggy clothes was now presenting research at conferences. The transformations still surprised me sometimes. My mother came to visit for Parents' Weekend. It was her first time seeing me in my element at school. She met my friends and professors, attended a lecture I was tying, and saw the life I had built. At dinner she said, "I barely recognize you, but in the best way. You're so confident, so sure of yourself. Is it weird that I'm proud of who you've become even though it happened despite me? Or maybe because of me in a backwards way?" I thought about her questions seriously. "We can't change what happened," I said finally. "But maybe it made me stronger, forced me to figure out who I was, separate from who you wanted me to be. That doesn't make it okay, but it makes it part of my story. And I like who I'm becoming, so I have to accept all the parts that got me here. Even the ugly parts." She nodded, tears in her eyes but a small smile on her face. Spring brought acceptance letters to graduate programs. Good ones. Programs I had dreamed about but never thought I'd actually get into. My mother was the first person I called when I got into my top choice. Her screams of excitement were so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. "We're celebrating," she declared. Properly. No food weirdness, just pure celebration. And we did. Dinner at a nice restaurant, champagne toast and all. Graduation arrived in a blur of caps and gowns and family photos. My grandmother flew up again, complaining about airline prices, but wouldn't miss it for the world. Aunt Teresa cried through the entire ceremony, and my mother sat between them, beaming with a pride that finally felt clean and uncomplicated. No agenda, just a mother watching her daughter achieve something meaningful. At the family dinner afterward, my mother raised her glass for a toast. To Emily, she said, her voice only shaking a little. Who survived things no child should have to survive. Who found her strength when I tried to take it away. Who broke cycles I couldn't break. Who became the woman she was meant to be, not because of me, but in spite of me. And who somehow found a way to forgive me anyway. I'm proud to be your mother, even though I didn't always deserve the title. We all cried then, even my stoic grandmother. Because it was true, all of it. The pain and the survival and the slow journey towards something resembling forgiveness. Not the movie version where everything is suddenly okay, but the real version where you choose to move forward carrying your scars, but not letting them define you. Where you learn to love someone who hurt you while still protecting yourself. Where you break generational patterns through sheer determination and therapeutic support. That night, as I packed up my dorm room for the last time, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. The scared girl weighing herself in secret, hoping for change. The teenager discovering her mother's betrayal and choosing to fight back. The young woman learning to exist independently, to make choices about her own body and life. All versions of me that had led to this moment, standing on the edge of a future I had fought to create. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. A simple message, just 3 words sent before she went to sleep. "I love you. No conditions or complications, just love." I texted back the same words, meaning them fully for the first time in years. Because love could coexist with boundaries. Forgiveness could coexist with vigilance. Family could be rebuilt on healthier foundations. And I could be whole while still healing. The next morning, I loaded my car with 4 years' worth of life and learning. My mother had offered to help, but I had gently declined. Some journeys you have to complete alone. As I drove away from campus toward graduate school and whatever came next, I thought about Phoenix mythology. How the bird had to burn completely before it could rise. How the ashes were necessary for the transformation. How the new Phoenix carried the memory of fire, but wasn't consumed by it. My story wasn't unique. All over the world, children were struggling with parents who confused control with love, who projected their own trauma onto the next generation, who meant well but caused harm anyway. But survival was possible. Recovery was possible. Breaking cycles was possible. It just took courage and support and the willingness to choose differently, to refuse to pass on the pain, to become the phoenix rising despite the ashes of the past. The road stretched ahead, full of possibility. Graduate school and career and relationships all waiting to be explored. My mother and I would continue our complicated dance of connection and boundaries. There would be setbacks and breakthroughs and moments when the past felt too heavy to carry. But I would carry it anyway, transformed from burden to strength, because I was no longer the girl trapped by someone else's fears. I was the woman who had claimed her own freedom. And that made all the difference.